Well, welcome to the Careers in Cannabis panel discussion. We're glad you're here. My name is Lisa Sewell, and I have been an advocate here in Texas since 2018. Some of the work I've done is we do press releases, work with different nonprofit organizations, organize decriminalization efforts, but mostly I am actually working to have a license here in Texas for medical dispensaries. So this is a very interesting topic I like to talk about. And I would like to introduce our panelists. Just a quick note, Leah Laskins is not able to make it, but she'll be here later. You'll have to meet her. She's a great entrepreneur here in Texas. And we'll start with Andrea. Andrea is an attorney of the Houston office and Frost Brown Todd, a national full-service law firm with over 550 lawyers. Licensed in both Texas and Oklahoma, she serves cannabis businesses across the supply chain and compliance, contracts, licensing, marketing, labeling, policymaking, real estate, and financing. Whew. Andrea also advises on issues unique to the industry, such as Delta-8 and other novel cannabinoids. Dr. David Baltensperger is here, and he provides leadership and administration for large comprehensive programs of research. He teaches an extension in the soil and crop department here at Texas A&M. He's leading the move into hemp research by many Texas agri-life scientists, focuses on everything from plant breeding, variety adaptation, gene editing for enhancing specific traits, advanced testing techniques for cannabinoids and phenolics, disease resistance, product development, and agronomic practices. So that's amazing. And Miss Jill Carrerio, she helps to lead the team at our New Hampshire-based Orange Photonics in providing Light Lab 3 portable cannabis analyzers. She's coming to the pharmaceutical space where she brings a deep understanding of regulatory requirements, compliance of GMP, quality testing, product consistency, and consumer safety. And she is very passionate about this industry. So we're very excited to hear from our panelists today. So that being said, what brings you all to the industry?
I'll start. Again, Andrea Sewell, can you guys hear me like this?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, there we go. Thank you for the introduction, Lisa. Sure. Andrea Sewell, attorney with Frost Brown Todd. A little bit about my trajectory getting into this industry. After I graduated undergrad, my background was criminal justice and sociology. I spent 5 years working in corrections. I was a parole and probation officer in Washington, D.C. and Harris County in Texas. And I went to law school, assuming I would go into some sort of criminal defense. Ended up getting into affordable housing development. And so I've been an attorney now for 13 years. For the first 10 years, I represented affordable housing developers, for-profits, nonprofits, public housing authorities, in a range of transactions, generally real estate transactions, financing, equity, debt, a lot of layers of funding, including federal and state and local grants. I started getting interested in the cannabis space on a legal level, watching as the medical states were beginning to legalize across the country, starting with California. But then when Washington and Colorado, went legal for adult use, it became really evident to me that there was a need for lawyers. And I had already been practicing law for several years at that time. And so it was fascinating to me that these states were just so brazen that they were bucking the federal law, and there was not a lot of pushback from the federal government. So I just was fascinated by that and wanted to, I thought there was a space for a lawyer in there. And a few years ago, after doubling down and studying about cannabis and issues with law in cannabis across the country and in Texas, I expanded my practice into cannabis law. So I've been practicing now for a few years in this space. I represent companies across the spectrum, ancillary and plant touching businesses. And I spent the first 12 years of my career at another law firm, largely doing affordable housing development law. But then when I expanded into cannabis law, I launched and grew a cannabis practice group at that prior firm. And so I spent a couple of years doing that. And then I recently, about 8 months ago, moved into a much larger law firm, which allows me to have a platform that can service my clients in any form or fashion. So it's a full service law firm. So things that I'm not familiar with, Lisa gave a list of the things I can do, but the things that I'm not familiar with, I have a team of attorneys that can help with. So we have things like capital raising, trademarks, patents, blockchain, taxation, anything that a company needs, we have the availability to service those clients at our firm. It's a large firm, 550 attorneys across the United States. So, I started off just thinking this was cool and interesting and something I was really, really intrigued with, and then eventually started a business in there. Thanks.
So interesting, right? I'm Jill Carrerio, everyone, so I'm not up there, but I'm from Orange Photonics. We make a technology tool that the cannabis industry uses. And I've always been a technology person. I'm an engineer. I went to school with the idea that I was going to work in prosthetics and orthotics. I'm a materials engineer. I very quickly figured out that I never stopped talking. And so I got into sales, working for big scientific companies across the United States. And I've always really enjoyed helping folks understand the value of what I call disruptive technology, right? So scientists, they use big boxes that sit on a laboratory bench, and those are great solutions. I really enjoy when companies invent something cool, the new mousetrap. I enjoy helping people understand how to use that new mousetrap instead of the benchtop version of it, or how to use them together to further a business. So I was doing that for safety and security companies, pharmaceutical industry, food agroscience, folks that are making product or growing product and having to understand how do we apply science that usually comes in a laboratory in the warehouse or in the field. But I was always a lover of this plant, always a lover of this plant. And about a year and a half ago, I discovered this awesome orange box called Light Lab. And about a week and a half later, I was proud to be wearing orange as well. So that's how I got my jump into the industry too. I almost imagined the solution that I provide to you all. And I'm very happy to provide answers as the industry continues to develop. We're a national company. So we have folks that are right at the start of their story all across places like Texas and Louisiana, but then we also work with major MSOs with fleets of light labs to understand how to also employ the technology at the far other end of the cannabis industry spectrum. And then law enforcement utilizes our solution too. So I consider myself a teacher, and we just have a really cool box to help you understand cannabis science with it.
Thank you. I'm David Baltensperger. I'm the department head for soil and crop sciences here at Texas A&M. And I've been in that role for about 16 years and with 80 faculty and 250 staff across the state of Texas. We have 11 other locations around Texas from El Paso to Beaumont, where we have scientists that are working with our crop production for Texas. My background before coming to Texas was in alternative crops. And I worked at the University of Florida, and then I worked at the University of Nebraska. And alternative is always something other than the main crop that's growing in that area. And so I've worked with about 30 different genera of crops in my career and released varieties across about 30 different genera of crops. And so my varieties are growing on a few million acres each year in various states around the country. And so I had a lot of experience at bringing a crop from the beginning to someplace. Today, I wanted to start with just a little example, and that is soybean. Have any of you heard of soybean? Soybean today is the second or first largest crop in the United States, depending on whether you measure it in acres or volume of crop harvested. It's growing on more than 90 million acres a year in the United States. In 1950, it was not a crop in the United States. Some of my initial work at the University of Florida was looking at soybean as a forage crop. We were growing it for hay for cattle. At some point, we figured out how to shorten the soybean plant, alter it a bit to where it produced seed and oil at a different ratio. And it has grown from no acres in the United States to being the largest crop in the US. So that's one of the success stories of alternative crops. We just heard a speaker talk about other potential alternative crops, hemp, cannabis in general, as an alternative crop. So I have tremendous interest in any crop that has multiple uses, has a potential to grow and to take off. And so as soon as we had laws that allowed us to do research, we applied for a research license in Texas and got the first license in Texas for research. And we have about 15 faculty now that do something with hemp research, whether it's in Lubbock or San Angelo or El Paso or Dallas or here in College Station. And so it's been that kind of growth. The other thing that just excites me about those opportunities are the opportunities to train scientists, because that's really my job here, is to coordinate our training program for scientists. Well, when you don't know anything about a crop, it provides huge opportunity for study, understanding, and those fundamentals. And so we are looking to utilize it as a real example of how to do things and how to make progress with a new crop for our students. And they're excited about it. I teach hemp production management and utilization. And most of the students that take that class have never been around a piece of farm equipment in their life. And so it's my opportunity to explain crop production to them. But many opportunities coming, very exciting. Look forward to talking more to you today.
Thank you. So very general question and kind of a loaded one. How can people actually get involved in the cannabis industry here in Texas?
Oh, thank you. I think it's fascinating that we are in such very different roles all in the cannabis industry. And that's exactly what, we're talking about today. A lot of times I hear people, kind of speak out. They want the so-called low-hanging fruit, and they're saying they want to get into the industry. They want to open up. They want to retail, right? They either want to open up a brick and mortar, or they want to have an e-commerce store, and they think that's the way to go to make a lot of money in the industry. And while that may make sense for some entrepreneurs in some localities, a lot of times that's really not the best use of a person's knowledge and skills. So what I typically recommend is that people take a look, like really do a deep dive into yourself of what your own strengths and weaknesses are, where your knowledge and skills and abilities lie, where your passions lie, and take that and apply it within the industry. So for instance, I was already an attorney. So rather than me going to do something brand new, I use the skills I have and pivot into that career. I think once you take a candid look at your own strengths and weaknesses, you find that your best options are may not always be a plant touching business. It may be ancillary. And so I mentioned that before. And just to, for those of you that are brand new and may not know the difference, plant touching, you're dealing directly with the crop, whether you're, cultivating, processing, or selling. Whereas on the ancillary side, it's all of the businesses and operations that service those plant touching industries. So if you kind of broaden out the scope some, there's so many things: packaging, transportation, security, advertising, equipment, materials, teaching, so many things that plant touching companies need, but they don't have in-house. So I would suggest really at first, take a look within yourself of what your own where your strengths lie and where your passions lie, and then figure out a way. There's always a way to get there.
I couldn't agree more. And it doesn't just apply to Texas. I mean, that applies to Oregon, Massachusetts, Thailand, everywhere. Use what you've got. There are more jobs than you could possibly imagine in fields related to this industry. And again, it's not just, don't think about the dispensary as your starting point. I would also say, of course, coming from a scientific perspective, there is a great dearth of scientific knowledge that needs to be filled in. If you have the least bit curiosity about science or technology and you are a hustler, you're willing to work hard, that is what is going to make you succeed in this industry above all else. Your ability to connect with people and hustle is what drives your success in the cannabis industry. And so I would say, just like Andrea said, dig deep, figure out what your own skill set is, and then look to the industry, look to the job boards that exist, right? Those same job boards that are out there for other industries, they also exist for the cannabis industry, and start to think about what we may be able to offer, and get creative. Go for it. Connect with companies like mine. Get on LinkedIn. Get on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn and you want to be in the cannabis industry, do it yesterday.
One of the things that I really try to make sure that there's an awareness of is that as a new enterprise emerges and a new area emerges, there are many, many opportunities for entrepreneurs. If you are passionate about fishing, it doesn't necessarily mean you should take a job selling fish. There's a disconnect there. And so being passionate about cannabis use doesn't necessarily mean you should sell cannabis. And we have a lot of, any business has lots of failures when you talk about entrepreneurs and new starts. The statistics on new restaurant starts are daunting, but the opportunities are out there in a new arena. But the fundamentals of business are still in place. And the fundamentals of business are the cash flow has to start before the financing runs out. And we are dealing with a plant. Plants, even though our speaker talked about they change morphology during the year. Plants are, it's going to be the same this year, all year long. Once a year, we can modify a plant by making a cross. It's called generation time. And consequently, many of the timelines we see with entrepreneurs, are inadequate to get to the cash flow that will carry it on and keep it going. I don't want to sound like a downer. I just want to talk about realistically that you have to have that kind of enterprise mind in place if you want to be an entrepreneur in the area, which is a huge opportunity. Do not get me wrong. We have many who will make good money with it. But other jobs in the cannabis world, many of them include fundamentals like growing it, fundamentals like controlling insects on it, fundamentals like controlling diseases with it, like hops latent viroid, or things like that. We have, some of us survived chemistry. Some of us survived organic chemistry. Some of us were even foolish enough to take analytic chemistry after that. And yet developing equipment for testing, and we partner with several companies right now on developing testing. One of those companies provides equipment for us for our soil testing lab. So we have the capacity to test your hemp samples in San Angelo. We have the capacity to test your hemp samples in Lubbock and we have the capacity to test hemp samples here locally. So those opportunities for chemists are out there. She describes it well. I'll let it go.
Well, and this kind of leads into that conversation, with what are the current concerns? The fact that we have two vertically integrated companies here in Texas, or dispensaries. And how does that help with gaining entry into the market, and it limits the ancillary roles, right? So what is your feedback on that?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest barriers in Texas is that we currently have a vertical integration requirement, meaning that from seed to sale, everything's got to be done within one company, largely within one location. So growing, processing, manufacturing to final product, all in one place for the most part. So that makes it really difficult, because that kind of a requirement tends to only serve really a handful of large, well-capitalized multi-state operators who have that experience and have the money to build that kind of a facility and have the things they need to be able to carry out a vertical integration requirement. So it basically blocks a lot of small businesses from being able to enter on the plant touching side. It's not really good for business generally, because there's a barrier to entry that's just far too high. We have in Texas the highest license fees in the country. In order to become a medical dispensing organization. There's a very limited number of licenses. Lisa mentioned there's only 2 operating. There's 3 licenses that were awarded in 2017, and that's it. Only 2 are operating, and whether they open up the application cycle again anytime soon, we have yet to see. But we'll see what happens. That and so the high license fees, the limited number of license, and the vertical integration, that's some of the known factors that really prevent a lot of opportunities being available to anybody other than MSOs on the plant touching side. But again, when we go to the ancillary piece, you could attempt to get a job with one of these licensees, right? That'll get you on the plant touching side. But on the ancillary side, they need consultants, they need security, they need to be able to deliver the product safely all around the state. They need to have relationships with safe drop locations. They need to have relationships with doctors. They need banking, they need insurance, they need lawyers, and they need suppliers of materials and equipment. And a lot of these things, from on the non-hemp cannabis side, it's more limited. But you can also sometimes start on the hemp side in certain cases and get some experience and knowledge there, or go to another state and get some experience and knowledge in another place. And you've got to be creative, right? So I saw an ad yesterday about an Austin-based company that sells advertising in Chinese fortune cookies. And because there's a lot of limitations on how to market and advertise cannabis-based product, that was like a unique type of idea, but it apparently made quite a bit of money. So, try to look for the yes, not the no. We have some blocks here, but it doesn't mean it's no. It just means you have to be creative.
Yeah, vertical is not easy. I just spent some time recently in Florida, another verticalized market, obviously adult use, right? But they're in a space where they're celebrating 19 more licenses. But the case is still the same in that the challenges to approach a vertical market are much what Andrea suggests, the barriers of time and money, and then much more time, as Dr. Baltensperger mentioned earlier. They really have to be incorporated into your business plan to be successful in a verticalized state much more than others. I would say, though, in talking to the smaller businesses that were successful, and that was really valuable connection time in Florida with those vertical organizations and the teams at the kind of the lowest rung, because what they kind of described to me as their path to success was all built around relationships, right? They focused on what they did best. So that's something that we've talked about a lot here. But then they made sure that the folks that had the path to the legal market knew who they were. And so that's where I come back to hustling and relationships and the power of Instagram, the power of LinkedIn, the power of putting yourself out there and telling folks what you do very well and how you do it differently from anyone else. And if that's cultivating, or if that's driving a truck and keeping money bags safe, you can certainly sell that into an industry like this in Texas, and it won't be long. You'll have legal adult use eventually.
And so I think they described it well in that with 2 companies, if there are 40 employees in each of those companies, we have 80 jobs in Texas and 350 people here. So until there are some rule changes and more licenses are made available, the opportunities there are not overwhelming. We have one of the representatives of one of the companies here, a couple. So Wave and that's where you go if you're interested in that opportunity. But I wanted to back up just a little bit and say that some of those opportunities in that medical world right now are really stymied by medical researchers. We need quality medical researchers in Texas to take on the challenge of the opportunities of hemp so that they can generate data that will be useful in altering perceptions on it. And that's not anything against individual testing and evaluation, but if we don't have some data that we can produce a product that has a positive impact on health with minimal side effects, we will really struggle to convince our legal system to expand the licenses in Texas. And so one of the things we have to do is to work to bring really good medical scientists. So we have some places with name recognition like MD Anderson. We still have virtually no research with that company, that hospital on cannabis. And so one of the huge opportunities that I want to talk about is the opportunity for medical research.
Absolutely. If you don't mind holding them until the end, for sure. Thank you. But that actually adds to, there was a report a few weeks ago that said over 500,000 Americans work in the cannabis industry as we speak. And I'm going to be confident and say that doesn't include the numbers here in Texas, right? But looking at a state comparison for job growth, where do you see Texas moving forward?
I guess I'll go first on that. I think going forward, when Texas really begins to truly open up for cannabis businesses, that we're the gold mine. I think the sheer amount of land and people in this state just wins almost by default. Texas is a good place for business. There's no income tax. There's lower cost of living, mostly. There's a lot of large companies that are coming to Texas, Tesla, Amazon, a lot of tech companies. I feel like Texas is really a prize. We are behind only California in terms of population, with California having about 40 million, Texas having about 30 million, and then Florida and New York behind with about 20 million. So, and where California went with this, they legalized medical in 96. They legalized for adult use, I think maybe 6 years ago. But they're overregulated. They had 3 regulatory agencies. And not only do you have to deal with, well, they consolidated this year, but you had to deal with 3 regulatory agencies and at the local level. And then New York is just getting started and they're, going through their rulemaking process now. But again, they've got high taxes, they're overregulated. And so I think Texas really has a good opportunity to build off of what these other states have done and where they failed. So we've got 18 other states that are medical. And when I say 18 that are medical, I'm not talking about Texas. Most of the time when we talk about the states that are medical in this country, Texas isn't included in that number because the program is so restrictive. So 18 states, there's probably another 10 or so where Texas is included in that additional 10 that have these really, really restrictive programs that people don't really count. And you've got 30, I'm sorry, I said 18. 18 is adult use, 37 for medical. So I say that to say that, when Texas opens up the market, if they can do it in a manner where there's a reasonable licensing tiers, right? Where we get out of the vertical integration, where we reduce the fees to get into the industry. If we have reasonable taxes right now in the medical program, there's no taxes on the medication, which is wonderful. But in an adult use program, there's going to be some taxes. But if they can put in place reasonable regulations, reasonable and adequate enforcement against the true bad actors, I think there's an opportunity to massively transform the illicit market here and be an example for other states. Will it happen anytime soon? I don't think so. I think the medical program will expand. And I think the laws will change and the number of licensees will change in the nearer future, but we've got some time. We've got a ways to go here.
I think you have some time. I'm from Massachusetts, a legal state, of course, so it's an interesting perspective that I can bring. As an outsider, certainly there is great opportunity when the state of Texas decides to embrace cannabis fully as not just a hemp plant, right? As you're kind of driving towards that goal, I think David mentioned and hit right on it. The importance of having consumer confidence in the space, though, is going to be pretty important for success and kind of continued evolution of hemp and cannabis in Texas. And so I would say this is a pretty important moment for regulation to take a long, hard consideration of what will enable a flourishing industry, but also what has to be done on the science side of things to help consumers feel confident in the experiences that they're going to undertake and in the benefits of the plant and lack of any alternative effort or issues that might come up. And the science is there at broad scale, but I understand, Texas needs its own, and I support that as well.
So one of the really key job opportunities in Texas will be what I call consulting. Many of the people here actually are participating in that, but hemp and marijuana are the same plant one day. They are the same plant is hemp one day and marijuana a week later because of a 0.3 rule. And because of that, we will always be faced with some regulatory issues that relate to tracking and compliance and those kinds of things. Even in the legal states, there will become a rule compliance part. You can look at the beef industry, for example. There is an inspector in every processing plant. There are random inspections of every grocery distributor. That body that guides safety, whether it's medical safety or food safety, will require compliance. And if you are going to stay successful in the industry, you will have to stay legal. And that's not because of enforcement. That's because it will be enforced by your competitor who will turn you in. Okay? Because if they are following the rules or attempting to follow the rules, and you are gaining market share from them because you are skipping a rule, it will be someone from your own industry sitting at the table next to you that turns you in. It's not about a big bad law enforcement system, but those guidelines will be there and then they will have to enforce them.
And to follow from that, I do want to say the importance for the future of the industry here in Texas will also be based on a really robust relationship between industry and enforcement bodies and the Department of Agriculture. We talk about the state of California that had a crap show for a lot of years, right? And they just aligned 3 different regulatory bodies to the Department of Cannabis Control this last year. And, they utilize tools like our tool to essentially do exactly what Dr. Baltensperger mentions here, which is to enforce the illegitimate industry and make sure that the folks that have done it the right way have a chance to succeed. And the feedback that we get from counties all across Northern California and Oregon, those state level agencies tell us we wish we had gotten a more robust enforcement arm around cannabis and hemp earlier, because it was what precluded the folks that did it the right way, paid their licensing, jumped through all the hoops. It precluded them from being successful because there was just too much illicit competition happening for them to get off the ground. So right from day one, that should be at top of mind for the state of Texas.
I want to build on that too a little bit. I think your market wants to be able to purchase quality products that are regulated, and they will go to the illicit market if that's not available, or it's too expensive, or it's too inconvenient. But if you really want to convert the market, the illicit market that is huge, into a regulated one, you've got to have reasonable regulations, reasonable fees, reasonable access. So the policy
Absolutely.
side is so important. And a lot of opportunity in policy, because we don't have ours really set and developed yet.
Absolutely. So I think you've kind of answered a lot of my next question, but how do you enter the hemp industry now, and what's hopeful for the next few years?
You're here. Good job. You're here. Step one, right? Educate yourself. Understand your local picture, understand the national picture, starting with your states that feel and look like yours, both politically and regionally. But then get into the cannabis science. I could tell you again, the more that you know about this plant and the way that it works and the way that it grows and the way that it develops, the more usefulness you will have for anyone that wants to employ you going forward. So read, learn, listen, and keep coming to events like this.
Absolutely. Education's a great way to start, but there's huge opportunity in hemp in Texas right now with the legalization. We're exploring many products that can be built from hemp. You see some of them on display here, but I don't know what any of you had those, what are they called? Toilet paper that they make straws out of now in California, to where you can't drink out of them. Those can actually, plastic straws can actually probably be replaced with a hemp resin product that is biodegradable and can fit into that complex. It's a high value place that the industry has an opportunity to start. There are aeronautic. We have huge investment at A&M in the aeronautic space industry, and companies that are working to develop hemp fiber based resins to lighten airplanes and rockets to make them more fuel efficient. There's tremendous opportunity in the animal industry. Again, we face some regulations from the FDA because it was regulated as a drug. So then putting just the hemp plant in animal food is still a problem by our laws, but you can go to pet food stores and see the amount of CBD that's included in pet food, and know that there's some value to older arthritic dogs and to hyper dogs and many different kinds of things. Help with everything from racehorses to dairy, that relax dairy cows for milking. Those areas are real budding opportunities that exist. And again, I started with the timeline. It won't cash flow tonight. So you have to do the fundamental work to make it go. We have a few other things with hemp that are really exciting. The terpene market is legal and is used from everything from pest control to flavors. And so the hemp plant can be altered, which is why I'm interested in the trichome work and we are looking at it is we're looking at producing things through the trichomes that can hit that market. So those are, because that's what's legal today, right? And that's where Texas A&M is going to be, is where it's legal yet today. Okay. So this is the area I spend my time in, is talking about how to make the hemp industry go. And it's really a career opportunity. And there's a lot of plant touch opportunities in the hemp industry, which that knowledge is almost 100% transferable, even though there are kinks to it. If you are growing it for THC, knowing the hemp plant is a big start. And we are getting much better at understanding the nutritional requirements of the hemp plant, the things like pest control, but all of those, as you are growing more plants, are opportunities. So the hemp industry is growing very rapidly in Texas. And you know, it's always easy to grow when you have $1 of something and you get $2, it's 100% increase. But we are now growing enough that when you have $10 million of crop production, it becomes 20 million. And we are hitting that stage where there will be real impacts on job opportunities and careers in hemp in Texas. So I'm excited.
Should be. Massachusetts and Illinois made more off of adult use cannabis taxes last couple of quarters than they did in alcohol and cigarettes combined. So I think the dollars do speak volumes.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind me jumping in, it kind of made me think of something. It's so silly that the FDA won't allow us to give a good product such as hemp to our animals, but they make a huge market in selling catnip and labeling it marijuana. So I just find it very interesting. There's so much opportunity. I hope they improve that very soon for our animals. What are some pitfalls?
Do I get to answer?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
Go for it.
I gave up the first spot the last time, so wanted to make sure I claim it back. Jill mentioned your first step here. You came here today. Meeting people is the most important part and the best way to first get your foot in the door, and studying, which both of you mentioned. Before I proclaimed myself or held myself out as being an attorney in the cannabis industry, I spent at least a year really, really studying before I would even tell anybody this is what I'm doing. And that was after years of kind of watching. So yeah, studying, meet people. The hemp industry in Texas is not difficult to get into. If you wanted to get a license to manufacture a process, I mean, we're talking it's a few $100, not even. Same for a retail registration, less than a couple $100. Now, obviously, to start the actual business, there's more startup costs, but the license itself is not difficult to obtain. Start small and grow, but don't be too overeager and jump in like everything right away. And also find your niche in the market. You're not going to be able to do all things on all cannabis. Find your area that you specialize in and build your team, because you're not going to be able to do it all by yourself. So find out people, like you're meeting people here and you meet people throughout, all the as you go through your days. Figure out who you can trust, who you can rely on, who's going to be credible, who's going to actually, be there when you need them and bring something to the table of value to build on your team.
Absolutely. So what are some pitfalls and ways to avoid them? And what skills from other startups do you apply to the cannabis space? And how do you find those folks?
Hello. We have made a lot of progress today in covering those pitfalls as we talked about opportunities, because we're all a little cautious to just oversell it. And so one of those pitfalls that I mentioned was the timeline. One of those pitfalls is inadequate compliance efforts upfront. They are hard to clean up, and they are more expensive because A legal consultant in doing it right might only cost $10,000, and a legal consultant to get you out of a mess is going to be more. Not to try to inhibit that, but it's compliance cannot be understated as an issue. And she mentioned how easy it is to get a license, but there are many parts of it, especially in hemp production. You need a site permit for each variety you grow. So if you grow 5 varieties, it's not $100, it's $500 because you have to have one for each variety. You need a transport permit, both to bring it to your farm and to move it from your farm. You need to pay someone that is certified before 10 days before harvest in Texas to tell you that it's not above 0.3 THC, that the government has confidence in, and I has certified them. And so only certain labs are certified. It's just one more expense. We estimate that the licensing and permits for a hemp farmer of 30 acres with 3 varieties, 10 acres each, is going to be well over $1,000 to get permitted, which isn't necessarily a lot, but the licensing to get that same 30 acres of wheat is 0. And so when you are talking about being the low cost producer and being competitive in things like a building materials market, a feed market, and things like that, you are competing against crops that have no licensing fees. Okay. And so that's one of the pitfalls, is that because we're dealing with a regulated plant, there will always be some overhead to it. So it has to be a bit more valuable than the alternative to grow. So if we're looking at fiber for paper, we make paper already. He's writing on paper. There's a couple of them still don't use electronics, but if you're competing in the paper market, you're competing with cotton, right? You're competing with wood pulp. Those are pretty darn cheap. And so you have to be able to get to that level. And a lot of people go, well, I can make it out of hemp, but can you make it as cheaply out of hemp? And people will pay a premium, but that premium's only so much. You know, he's got a nice notebook there, and I'm sure he would pay another $1 to have it be hemp paper in there, but he probably wouldn't pay $25 more. So, you know, at some point there's a break.
I guess that's what I would point out as a pitfall that, you know, folks coming into the industry should really understand. It's a plant. And frankly, a lot of folks approach, especially cultivation and plant touching roles, as I'm trying to grow the most amount of plant matter. But frankly, we're not growing plant matter, we're growing cannabinoids. And so starting with an understanding of the science of what you're working with, but also of the market, because you can grow a plant for cannabinoids that costs or will get you $300 for a kilogram, or you can grow a plant for cannabinoids that gets you $20,000 per kilogram. And they come from the same hemp plant, but they are very, very different plants. And so understanding that, utilizing the tools and the technologies that are available to be able to do the best by the cultivation or the extraction work that you're doing, those are the pitfalls that, you know, we try to help people avoid.
I would say, obviously, as an attorney, not consulting a lawyer early on, right? But it's true, and Dr. Baltensperger pointed that out. Make sure, especially I mentioned before, you have business partners, or if you have business partners, you're not a solo business, that you've got the correct operating agreements in place among your partners. You basically want to set up you set up for divorce before you even get married, right? Because you want to plan for that in advance when everybody's happy with each other, so that when you get to the point, hopefully you don't ever get to that point. But if there's a fight and there's a dispute, you went into that in good faith, knowing how to get out of it if that comes up. So making sure you have adequate banking, insurance, like these are things that are foundational to a business. And I've seen people jump into the industry and then not be able to proceed because they didn't get this stuff planned out in advance. And then they weren't able to find a bank that would hold them, or they wouldn't able to find insurance that they could afford. Please don't pull legal documents off the internet if you don't understand the implications of them. Do your due diligence on your third-party vendors and your partners. Vet them, check their references. If they have sites, go look at their sites. Know who you're dealing with. There are, in any emerging industry, and I think this one kind of has its own little culture where there are some people that are just really shady. I mean, that happens anywhere, but it's prevalent in new industries, certainly this one. Plan, and plan your backup plan and plan to pivot, because the rules change frequently. Things change so much. And sometimes the one rule change can shut down your whole business. So you have to don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't be overeager jumping into the market before you've even explored what the market will support. Make sure that it's not already oversaturated. Again, I can't tell you how many people are like, I'm going to start an e-commerce business. And so is everybody else. So how do you set your brand apart? How do you have a product that's different than what other people have? How are you going to bring people to your site? So really do your market study. And then another thing I've seen is make sure your brand is marketable before you start to scale, because you may find that you have this wonderful logo and name and you're infringing upon somebody else's rights after you've already started to build your brand. So that's another thing, check in advance. That's what I have.
Awesome. So we have about 10 more minutes. So we just wanted to offer, if y'all have any questions. Yes, me? Go for it.
Hi, I'm Paris Riley. I graduated from A&M here in 2019 with my master's in natural science. I'm here for the researchers. Like, I'm trying to get a job with doing the research. So the problem is not a lot of opportunities. And you're saying that there's not enough at the scientific end to validate the policy change. The policies make it hard for us to do the research in the first place. So we're in this catch-22 because not only when you do research, you have to worry about the state policy, but you have to worry about federal policy. And then they have all these rules, but we can and cannot use, and they're so limiting. What is the best thing for me to do to help policy change so that I can get that opportunity for a job?
I have no idea. I can tell you that if I understood the political process, I would be involved in containing Putin this week, but I do not understand the political process. And I pretty well figured out how to fight with my wife and kids and the rules and the guidelines. But when it comes to politics, I will defer to someone with legal background.
I guess as I'm passing through the middle here, I would say,
I'm like, we're behind the eight ball too, because there's all these certain products only and single compounds. So limited.
I understand that.
the pain is real, right?
When it comes to policy, so I think your first line of communication is to your local representative. They will listen to their constituents, or they will at least hear you. So they'll hear you out. And this is something that's a little tough to talk about, but it's important to bring up that you've got to organize if you're going to lobby and donate.
Yes.
It is not something that, and it's not like you're donating to get what you want passed. It's donating so that after the constituents, when they're trying to figure out who they're meeting with their people who donated. So that's how you get heard, not necessarily listened to, but that's how you get heard. And so it's tough when you're not a well-capitalized organization to drop $10,000, $15,000 for a donation, But when you organize and you have coalitions and you have industry associations, if they are well organized and they, are like, that's, you got to group up together to get policy changed.
Absolutely. And just a quick policy note for anyone who doesn't know who the rep is, it's whorepresentsme.org. You type in your address, it'll tell you your state House representative and your Senate representative. And it is imperative that you talk to them and tell them where you stand. I mean, it's something that, and it's nice to see the supermajority of Texas legislature does vote in favor of medical expansion and decriminalization efforts, but there's still a lot to be done. So that I definitely think if you're looking to merge into the industry, that would be your first step, is start building those relationships with your representative, help them understand what you're looking for, and help them understand why we need more research and more an expanded market. So.
Those groups already exist in terms of advocacy as well. Right now,
Yes.
they're specifically designed to help advocate at the state level. So your question about research, it hasn't, there's no fund set up, no appropriation set up to help expand or advance that market. So bringing that need to people with coalition like that, get that idea set up agenda item to be able to advocate that for the state level. So it's bottom up grassroots advocacy, mixed with grass top advocacy, mixed it with academia and research, all that together, coalescing strategies to the population.
Thank you. Good point. Yes.
Lots of other
Yes.
questions.
So I can't hold myself. I'll say that this, I agree with you, this passion. I can't wait until there's a fishing trade. It's a major thing. The hemp growth has been in the salt water for centuries. Great opportunity. The other thing is our Gulf Coast is eroding, and there is a lot of underground growers growing marijuana in the salt marshes that survive high salinity. It'd be great to have them out. Farming can handle high salinity and protect the erosion of the Gulf Coast. So that's all about fishing. Yeah, and nature. But I also want to touch upon Andrea maybe make a comment that in the state of Texas, you actually don't need to be a vertically integrated operator. You just need to win a license in the state of Texas. If I'm not mistaken, there's 3 licenses that have been issued in the state of Texas. One of them is non-operational. And I believe that those licenses, I'm not sure what is happening. There's no transparency. There's no communication. I think the license owners are trying to make a career of reselling that license, which is coming with a huge debt attached to it, so they can't do it. It is not clear who is growing cannabis, whether it's good ones of Terra or the Texas Compassion Cultivation. Of course, you know, Texas Compassion Cultivation is growing it. They're showing how they're growing. So really, to have a license in Texas, you have to have a license in Texas. The unfortunate thing is 18,000 patients now, 2 licensees, 9,000 patients. If one patient spends $50 a month, $400,000 for a licensee. We're at the point where we need a lot more transparency. And I think that information about vertically integrated, it's not being clearly communicated who is not, who's holding the licenses, and the regulators are not doing their favors here. That's my question / comment, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We have time for one more question.
Okay. Not so much an answer. I just want to say, Dr. Zaburkis has a talk too, where he's going to talk about this Texas Compassionate Use Program and these numbers in depth. So go see his panel.
Awesome.
Yeah, my question is approaching the academic community from the private sector, and where we're seeking input, collaboration on learning to know what we don't know, and a lot of that discovery and that new things that I'm not going to research because I'm not a researcher, and so a lot of it's multiple disciplines, and so you might have agronomy over here, you might have building sciences over here, you might have, same plant agronomy research, and then medical. How would you advise the private sector to engage with the academic sector to where we can have those multiple disciplines all kind of collaborate and share information and gain knowledge?
So for the past 2 years, I've served as the point of contact for anyone from industry that wanted to come to A&M. I have guided those who want to work on aeronautic engineering products to our space and aeronautics engineering group, and those who want information on how to grow it to our agronomist. But I'm a bit overwhelmed, so we are expanding that to our Office of Corporate Relations, and they've been participating in those efforts. But you got my card. You can email me.
Perfect.
I want to ask you, I see grants being opened up by the USDA often for a variety of programs. Where do you all, and I some of them are going right to Texas A&M. So can we talk a little bit about getting grants to maybe pursue some projects?
So this past year, we participated in a $10 million grant with Cornell University and Virginia Tech, and a consortium included Florida. We were not successful in that grant, but we have a new proposal into another granting agency within USDA right now to look at hops latent virus and hops latent thyroid and how we can control it. And so we constantly apply for grants and partnerships. It's truly where the funding that drives the potential research comes from. One of the things that I wanted to mention, it's not my area, but Texas does have a really strong program in cancer research. They fund that through a particular program within Texas. And as of now, I've not seen a single proposal for testing in that arena, in those projects. So I think there are opportunities out there. In the past, we faced some issues where there was specific wording in that it cannot be an illegal drug. And so most of the federal agencies have now altered their language so that hemp is not excluded from federal research projects. And that's what the USDA did 2 years ago. So the first real money started coming 2 years ago for hemp. The USDA has invested in a hemp repository. We have a crop repository for every other crop in the US, but because it was illegal, we have never collected hemp and stored it in our national seed storage system. And that is housed at Ithaca, New York. And they spend about $500,000 a year to collect hemp and have different samples that are publicly available. So you can get 100 seeds for nothing once that's up and running. And I believe they hope to have it up and running about 18 months from right now. So
I wanted to add on also that the state of Texas, as part of the legal changes that took place in the last legislative session, that we now allow for institutional review boards, where if a researcher, doctor partners up with one of the medical dispensing organizations, which, as we know, there are only 2 operating here, potentially more in the future, but you can partner up and explore how low THC cannabis, which in our state means up to 1%. That doesn't necessarily mean the milligrams are low. It just means 1% of, the volume for the THC. So there's opportunities there, and you can try them for any condition. It doesn't have to be one of the listed qualifying conditions. So the exploration of opportunity is potentially out there. And I don't know if any IRBs have been set up yet with cannabis.
That's a pretty good opportunity for the Texas industry, because you have such a strong novel cannabinoid industry here, based around these weight percentage guidelines that are in place. And I think if you are the first state to develop and introduce real science around some of that, it could be great potential for Texas. So
And we have one of the largest medical centers in the world in Houston. So the opportunity is there. It just has not yet been exploited.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming to our panel discussion very much. Thank you. And if you have any questions for us, just find us after. So enjoy the rest of the conference.